Hello, my name is Steve Phillip. For many years, I worked as an independent consultant, director of a leadership and management training company. And in 2019, I was heading towards a life of semi-retirement. But on December the 4th of 2019, I received a call that would fundamentally change my life forever. That call was to tell me that my 34-year-old son, Jordan, had taken his own life. Jordan, at 34, was somebody who had a well-paid job. He was successful in his career as a consultant with the Independent Office of Police Conduct. He had a loving girlfriend. He had a loving family. He had a wonderful network of friends. In many respects, he was the guy that his friends aspired to be. He was good looking, 6 foot tall plus, and someone who was always there for his friends whenever they were struggling. However, what many of them were not aware of was 4.5 years earlier, Jordan was diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression. This was something he dealt with very privately through GP visits and antidepressant medication. It was something he very rarely talked about, but it did affect his day-to-day life. Although typical of many men, Jordan masked it particularly well. In the UK, we lose approximately 6,000 plus people to suicide every single year. That's 17 people every day. Suicide is actually the biggest killer of young people under 35 years old. That's not diabetes, not cancer, not road traffic accidents or heart attacks. It's suicide that is taking our young people at the highest number. For every suicide, it impacts indirectly or directly another 135 people. Just imagine for a moment, that's 800,000 people every single year who are impacted in the UK by suicide. Through our work at the Jordan Legacy, we've come to understand that many of those suicides are preventable, particularly if we have early identification of the danger signs. If there is early intervention, if we know early enough what the signs are that we're looking for and how to step in, and we can put those prevention measures in place. And importantly, that we provide support for those who have been bereaved by suicide, who are 65% more likely to attempt to take their own lives following such a loss. How do you spot the warning signs? Sometimes it's very difficult. People who are considering ending their own lives become extremely good at hiding the fact they have that intention. But we can see changes in behavior. Sometimes these behavior changes happen very quickly. Sometimes they're over a period of time. We can see people emotionally start to become maybe more anxious or nervous. Maybe their confidence isn't quite what it was before. They become a little more sensitive to criticism. Maybe their thinking process is not quite what it was. Their levels of motivation or concentration are not where they were before. They become indecisive. Maybe they start to isolate themselves from social group or work situations. Internally, they can often start to have feelings of low self-esteem or even self-loathing. And in the worst cases, of course, a sense of wanting to end their own life and escape some of the mental pain they're in. Physically, we may see changes of weight loss or gain, people suffering with aches and pains or having panic attacks or dizziness. But it's the behaviors in particular that we may notice. Disrupted sleep, where someone has not been sleeping well for days, maybe weeks on end. Maybe they're underperforming in the workplace or not turning up for work as often as they did. Perhaps they're avoiding, as we said earlier, those social situation or activities or hobbies that they once really enjoyed. Maybe there are definite signs of self-harm or risky behavior taking place. What's really important when we spot any of these symptoms is that we know how to support someone. And although this is not a definitive list from the Jordan Legacy on how we would go about this, all the knowledge and expertise that we've taken from some of the bigger charities and other organizations who work in mental health crisis and suicide prevention tell us there are probably 4 steps. One is we need to engage that person in a conversation. We need to seek to understand what's going on for them, provide a level of support within our own limitations, and then signpost them to more professional help. So if you see somebody who is displaying any of the symptoms we mentioned earlier, should you approach them? In my view, you should, absolutely. Even if it ends up in an embarrassing conversation when that person tells you they're absolutely fine. I think we would much rather approach them and know that there wasn't an issue than avoid approaching them and discover the worst case scenario has happened. I think when you have that conversation, it's really important to be prepared. You don't need some grand master plan, but at least have an idea what it is you want to ask or what it is you want to say. And remember, this is not about solving the situation. This is about trying to understand what's going on for the person. And also plan how you're going to be during that conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have at all. So your own demeanor, your body language, and the tone of your voice are going to be really important. You're going to ask open questions, but the single most important thing you're going to do is listen to that person. We've had many conversations with people that were very close to ending their own lives, and yet somebody had intervened. And when we've asked those people, what is it? What was the one thing particularly that brought you back, that made you feel that you didn't need to take that step? And often we've heard it was just the fact that there was someone there who was prepared to listen without any judgment. We ask people all the time, how are you doing? And we often receive the stock answer, I'm fine. Maybe we need to start asking that question in a better way. Maybe we need to start asking it more than once. And the second time we ask that question, maybe we need to change the emphasis. Okay, Steve, but how are you really doing? Just asking that second time can make a huge difference. In terms of support, once we've asked questions and maybe assessed the situation, I think it's really important, as I say, to encourage that person to talk and listen. Asking them how they would like to move forward is crucial. One thing we've learned is that people don't want, as I said earlier, for people to come in and fix their problem. It's important to them they retain a degree of control. Ask how you can support them, though, as well. What is it you can do right now? Perhaps just asking some simple questions using a framework like TED: tell, explain, and describe. Steve, tell me how you're really feeling at the moment. Just explain to me what you're experiencing so I can understand. Describe to me how this is impacting on you. A really simple framework we can use to ask some very useful open questions. Signposting, it could be that you come along as part of your preparation with a list of mental health or suicide prevention or crisis websites. But perhaps asking good questions is another way of signposting someone. Steve, have you considered contacting your GP? It's interesting. No, I hadn't thought about that, but actually maybe that's a good idea. Or, yes, I did recently, but it was the worst experience ever. But at least you've opened the door and asked the question. Who else is there in your family? Maybe your friends or network or an organization that you'd feel more comfortable speaking about this to. Again, just plant the seeds that maybe there are other people that they could speak to who could be supportive. Ask them if they're receiving any form of counseling or treatment at the moment. Again, it may prompt them to think that maybe that is a good route to go if they're not. And again, come prepared for the meeting with some suggestions that maybe you could offer them that might be really useful and you could signpost them to. Ultimately, you may be having a conversation with someone that you feel is at risk. The signs are there, they're really clear, even the language that they're using, such as I don't want to be here anymore or I've had enough. Wherever you believe there is such a risk, there's only one question that you can ask. It is probably the most difficult question that you're going to ask. And maybe the way to phrase that is to say, you know, Steve, sometimes when people are feeling this way, but they've not been sleeping for long periods of time and they've started to drink a little bit more, and I've noticed that each night you're just having a few beers each night, you've told me, and often finishing off with a whiskey or a short of some kind. And you've told me how work is just getting you down. A combination of these things. Sometimes when people are feeling this way, they consider suicide. I need to ask you, are you considering ending your own life? And if the answer to that question is yes, you need to ask them, do you know how and when you intend to do this? There is a myth out there that if you ask this question, you plant the seed of suicide in someone's mind. That myth has been dispelled so many times. And the evidence is that when you ask that question, you potentially save a life. And so many people have said that when someone asked me that question, it was the biggest relief because it validated my thoughts for the first time. Ultimately, mental health and preventing suicides is as much about caring for our own well-being as it is putting preventative measures in place. It's important that we all look after ourselves better, that we improve our sleep hygiene at night, that we reduce some of those risky behaviors such as gambling or drinking or anything else that might cause a risk to health, that we maybe minimize TV news and social media consumption and have a healthier relationship with those platforms, that we don't sit around all day at our desks, that we move around. There's so much evidence to suggest that prolonged periods of sitting down can lead to physical ailments such as cancers and diabetes and circulatory problems, but it can also lead to mental health illness such as depression as well. Exercise outdoors, then, really, really important and can be a huge benefit to you, as can what we put into our bodies. So diet and nutrition, really important to us. But the people we've spoken to who have attempted to take their own lives, that have now to a large degree got themselves back on track, have told us that staying connected with people that were really important to them made a huge difference. Making time for themselves, trying something new, or maybe just practicing mindfulness or yoga, but something for themselves, was crucial in their recovery. As too as practicing gratitude and giving to others as well. And giving to others isn't necessarily about financial donations. It can be simply about giving of your time and volunteering, or things that make us feel better, contribute to society as well, and improve our mental health and well-being. There are lots of things that we can do to prevent suicides. Most of them are practical actions, but looking after ourselves is probably the most important thing we can do. Thank you for listening. I'm Steve Phillip. I'm the founder and director of the Jordan Legacy CIC, and our mission is to help us move towards a zero suicide society.